Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit about our sort of addictions to productivity in particular, something which I've noticed when reflecting on my own life, on my own sort of habits with regards to creating content. And I want to talk about it as a sort of an exploration, I suppose, of the way our culture values stillness and rest. Now, an addiction to productivity is sort of the way I experience it is through this niggling feeling that I ought to be doing more right. And my current sort of consistency of output is not sufficient. And I suppose this addiction is it leads to this sort of feeling of inner lack or inner not enoughness. And you try to fill that sort of void within you by doing more, by being more productive, by doing all the various routines and things and constantly stimulating yourself because, you feel like that is what you do, right? We look upon the workaholic as someone who is doing something good, whilst they are sort of obviously compromising all the other aspects of their life solely for work. Our culture seems to sort of glamorize and reward that sort of behavior, even though it isn't really the best way of being for inner harmony and particularly balance of living. And if you look at many jobs that people work in, particularly where they are surveilled, most jobs have this sort of degree of surveillance, unless you're, working for yourself. And this surveillance comes with a kind of assessment or measurement of how productive you are. So everyone who is working, they are sort of conditioned and trained to be thinking, am I doing enough? Or particularly, does it look like I'm doing enough? People will pretend to work a lot, And I suppose even people who work for themselves, such as myself, there is this sort of sense that you're trying to satisfy this sort of inner boss or inner sort of egoic evaluator who is sort of noting down, watching, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? And if you're not doing enough, then you experience this feeling of, shame, this feeling of worthlessness, that, oh, I'm a bad person because I am not doing enough. And this sort of subtle psychological conditioning that I think inheres in many people, it creates a culture or a population that is chronically busy. Or if they're not really busy, they seem to be busy. And I know some people who are like this, people in my family who they'll wake up in the morning and they feel this sort of just this unquenchable urge to do something, to be productive, whether it's doing stuff around the house or gardening or cleaning or anything. They have to be doing something, right? And I think, what this really points to is that, if you're not doing something right, if you're not engaged externally out in the world in some kind of productive pursuit, you're basically doing nothing. And doing nothing in our culture is not valued at all because, what's the monetary value of that? You're not producing anything. Because, of course, all of us, we're just these worker cogs, ultimately. At least as we are seen by the, the so-called elite or whatever, the people, the bosses who, need people working in order to keep everything churning along. People who are inactive, people who are passive, who are sitting down doing nothing, they are worthless in the current economic paradigm. But as organisms, as forms of life who require sleep, who require rest, we need those moments of stillness, right? And just because, sleep isn't producing stuff, it doesn't mean it's worthless. Our rejuvenation of our body and our energy requires that we, from time to time, do nothing, right? And I also think there's a deeper value in stillness and doing nothing. Because when you're doing nothing, right, when you're just watching the stream of experience playing out, you're seeing clearly all the various patterns that you've been avoiding, the patterns of repression that you have. When often chronic productivity is a way of avoiding inner introspection. And I think that's very true. That we feel this sort of anxiety, this inner angst, and we feel, oh, how am I going to resolve this feeling, right? And we resolve it by doing stuff, because we feel that in doing stuff, we're doing something worthwhile, we're doing something meaningful. Because there's a subtle belief that doing nothing, the simple act of existence itself, is not meaningful, right? And this is the conditioning, right? The conditioning of our culture has been to instill in us that anything that is not work is not meaningful. And that's the real crux of the matter, right? And when we have our entire sense of meaning reduced and defined solely by work, then are we not solely worker bees? Is this the conditioning of us into a slavery, right? And if you think slavery doesn't exist, you're just not paying attention to the way in which modern slavery operates. Modern slavery is jobs, right? Just because you're paid money doesn't mean you're really free. If you look at your time, how much time you have to be in a particular place, and if you aren't in that place, you can't afford food or shelter or anything, you are ultimately a slave. Humanity is, by and large, throughout all of our history, a kind of slave species. And this is true. It's hard to really acknowledge this fact, but yeah, there's not much I can say. But what I'm talking about here is that this sort of addiction to productivity that we all have is a sort of a symptom of our slave consciousness that has been conditioned into us from childhood through school and through, entering the workforce, right? And to break out of that conditioning, right, to take sovereignty over your mind and your well-being, you have to notice these patterns, right? You have to notice the patterns that make you feel anxious, that make you feel uncomfortable with just being, okay? That sort of train these subconscious urges that sort of make you think, oh, I need to be doing something right now. I need to be doing something right now. This sort of restlessness. I want everyone here to to notice that within themselves, as I've done for myself. And because our work should not be this this survival thing we do, this thing to quell anxiety. Our work should be a loving activity, a loving act of creativity. And this is something that I think about. I want to make my work a true, authentic act of creativity. I don't want to be creating from this sort of anxious scarcity consciousness, because that infiltrates my work and it drains it of its essence, I feel. My work is best when I feel free and I feel liberated to just speak whatever needs to be spoken. I'm not speaking because I need to speak. I'm speaking because I want to speak. And I think that's just that's the point that I'm reaching right here now, as I enter a kind of flow state and I'm really surfing my stream of consciousness. But I'm not there all the time. Sometimes I am in these modes of being where I feel this oh shit, I need to put something out there in order to grow, in order to do all this this matrixy business talk, which drains my work. But because it's just the way our culture is, it has infiltrated my consciousness to some degree, I suppose. But I'm trying to purify that. I'm trying to reach an authentic mode of creation, because I feel that's the best way of creating. To ultimately be a beacon so that other people can resonate with that. I'm tired of seeing creators who are just totally sold out, who are totally just sort of enslaved to the algorithm. They've lost all of their sort of creative essence. They're just regurgitating stuff. I want to do something new. I want to do something, that takes some risks. And that's interesting, I want to surprise people. I suppose that's just all what my ego wants, I suppose. Ultimately, whatever will happen will just happen, and that's that, I suppose. But anyways, I hope that's been interesting and insightful. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Goodbye.